They say she's been married 3 times, and not once did she get to wear a brand new dress. In Dust Hollow, the wind slid across the low rooftops, carrying the quiet murmurs of the townsfolk. The wind here never brought rain. It only carried sand and rumors. Some said she was greedy. Some said she was foolish. Others whispered she carried bad luck for any man who married her. A few claimed she simply didn't know how to hold on to someone. But no one knew that every time the wind passed her porch, Maybelle Carter sat by the window stitching another patch onto her old wedding dress, as if she were mending a heart worn thin. That evening, the wind rose again, and the only white dress hanging on her porch swayed gently, as if it was finally ready to tell someone its story. Mornings in Dust Hollow always began with the sound of horses, the sharp ring of the blacksmith's hammer at old Mr. Brooks's shop, and the smell of fresh buttered biscuits drifting through town. Dust rose in soft red clouds along the main road, and sunlight caught the floating grains, turning them into something that looked almost like gold. Back then, Maybelle was just 19. She worked at the little diner at the end of the street, the stopover where stagecoach men swapped horses, drank strong black coffee, and bought warm bread before heading back out on the trail. She was soft, round, clumsy in a sweet way, and she laughed easily. When she laughed, her dimples sank deep and her shoulders bounced like willow branches touched by the wind. Kids in town called her Miss Maybelle, the butter girl. Some said it teasingly, some said it kindly, but she kept smiling anyway, dusting flour off her apron and wiping sweat from her forehead. She'd grown used to being looked at, so she learned to keep her eyes on her feet. One blazing afternoon, a young stagecoach driver named Henry Carter stopped in front of the diner. He was lean, shoulders dusty from the road, shirt damp with sweat. Unlike the loud men she'd grown used to, Henry was quiet, and his eyes had a gentle kind of humor. When she brought him water, he looked up and smiled, a smile that made her heart skip in a way she didn't understand. "The bread smells amazing," he said, "but I think the one who baked it smells even better." She blushed, dropped the spoon, and he picked it up without laughing at her. "It's all right," he said softly. After that day, he came back every afternoon, always choosing the table by the window, always ordering the same thing, buttered bread and coffee. She started waking up earlier to fix her hair, and she kept a tiny wildflower tucked in her apron pocket. He talked about the roads he'd traveled, the sky over El Paso, and his dream of owning a small ranch someday. She listened, and for the first time in her life, she felt like more than the butter girl. 3 months later, everyone in Dust Hollow knew Henry Carter was courting the biggest girl in town. People whispered. Men at Frank Miller's saloon, back when Frank had just arrived, chuckled into their drinks. But Henry just laughed, put his arm around her, and walked with her through the marketplace. He bought her a soft blue ribbon. "Let them talk," he said, "as long as you keep smiling at me." Under Henry's gaze, Maybelle felt beautiful. They married in the small chapel at the end of town. A worn-out priest, a handful of curious neighbors, and not much else. She had no new dress. She wore the simple white gown she had sewn herself from fabric her mother left behind, and Henry had polished her old shoes until they shone. After the ceremony, Henry took his wagon to haul goods, and she stayed home baking and planting 2 small rose bushes by the door. Every evening, he came back with a sack of flour and a few coins. They ate supper, talked until the oil lamp flickered out, and laughed loud enough for the whole street to hear. Life was simple, warm, and soft, like a loaf of fresh bread straight from the oven. They often walked through town in the evenings, passing the blacksmith shop where Samuel Brooks hammered steel with a steady rhythm. Maybelle waved to him. He barely looked up, but she caught the faintest smile on his face. One night, Henry rested his head on her shoulder and whispered, "You know, you're the first person who ever made this world feel worth staying in." She smiled, biting her lip. "And you're the first person who ever made me believe I deserved to be loved." The next winter, Henry accepted a hauling job to El Paso. The road was long and dangerous, but the pay was good. He wanted to save enough to buy the land they dreamed about. She begged him not to go. "The wind's too wild this season, Henry." He kissed her forehead. "Just a few days. I'll bring you back some fine fabric." The night before he left, she found him writing something under the lamplight in his old leather notebook. "What are you writing?" she asked. He smiled and folded the page. "A poem for you, but it's not finished." He tore the sheet gently, folded it small, and tucked it under the lining of her wooden sewing box. "What's that for?" she asked. "Just in case," he joked. "If I forget to bring you a gift, open that and forgive me." She playfully rolled her eyes, then forgot all about it. He left the next morning in heavy wind. By the next afternoon, the wind still hadn't stopped. On the third day, they found the wagon overturned in a rocky ravine. The horses were gone. Henry wasn't coming home. When the men brought back the only object that survived, a silver ring engraved with MC, she didn't cry. She sat by the window for 3 days and nights, staring toward the road to El Paso where the wind blew sand like smoke. The ache was too big to feel. People pitied her. Some whispered, "Poor girl, not married a full year." Others muttered, "That's the price of dreaming." In the numb days that followed, she packed his things. His shirts, his razor, his old leather journal, even the sewing box. She didn't open any of it. She shoved everything into her mother's oak chest and slammed the lid. She wanted to lock the past away. She said nothing to anyone. She simply folded her wedding dress, stitching the torn seam at the sleeve, slow and steady, as if mending something far deeper than fabric. Each night, when the wind swept across the porch, the chimes rattled like distant stagecoach wheels fading into nothing. For years afterward, people still saw her wearing that silver ring, and every time the wind rose, she would lay her hand gently against her heart, right where she still believed a piece of Henry had never left Dust Hollow. In this land, people were used to the wind taking everything: dust, men, hope. But every now and then, the wind left behind something faint and sweet, the scent of a love that never had the chance to fade. The wind in Dust Hollow never truly slept. 10 years after Henry's death, people still saw Maybelle open the old bakery each morning. She still smiled, still patched her worn wedding dress whenever the wind rattled the porch, but the smile no longer reached her dimples. It was just enough to let folks believe she'd moved on. She was nearing 30, tired of carrying her life alone. Frank Miller, owner of the Rusty Spur Saloon, had lived in town long enough to know every story that drifted on the wind. He was a widower, childless, and every night he polished glasses until his hands cracked. Frank was practical. He needed a woman to cook, clean, keep the saloon steady, and most of all, not demand anything he couldn't give. She met him on a dusty afternoon while delivering bread. He looked at her with the slow, measuring gaze of a horse trader sizing up a mare. He poured her a glass of water and said, "You've got hands that keep scent, hands of someone who works hard." The words startled her. It had been a long time since anyone offered a compliment, even a utilitarian one. She thought maybe practicality wouldn't break her heart the way dreams once did. Frank was nothing like Henry. He didn't speak much, didn't dream out loud, but his eyes carried something steady, the kind of weight that made people believe they might rest on those shoulders for a while. He asked her to marry him 3 months after they met. No church, no guests, just a quiet evening, 2 glasses of whiskey, and a promise that sounded more like a statement. "I won't promise happiness, Maybelle, but I promise you won't be alone anymore." She nodded. She was tired. She wasn't looking for love. She was looking for a place where the world would stop hurting. She wore her old wedding dress again. This time it felt tighter. Yet peace doesn't always look like comfort. In the early days, Frank cared for her with the habits of a man who expected obedience. He told her to eat less because people stare. He told her to sleep early, wake early, and not talk so much. He said, "I care about you. I just don't want folks laughing at me." She stayed quiet, not from anger, but from fear that she'd lose even the small kindness he offered. She left the bakery and moved into the cramped loft above the saloon. The smell of butter and flour was replaced by cheap whiskey and old tobacco. Every night the saloon filled with noise, music, shouting, while she sat by the stove listening to Frank's voice from afar, warm but distant. She grew afraid of her own smile, worrying he'd frown each time she showed too much joy. Frank's cruelty never came from fists. It came from words spoken in low tones meant to shrink her spirit. One afternoon, she baked a batch of her old butter biscuits and brought them downstairs. A drunk man whistled and jeered. "Hey Frank, your taste sure is something. Your wife looks like a loaf that rose too long." The whole saloon roared with laughter. Maybelle froze, the tray trembling in her hands. Frank didn't defend her. His face burned, not with anger for the man, but with shame. He shot her a cold look and hissed, "Get upstairs." That night, after closing, he sat in the dark and said, "You're good, Maybelle, but if you were just a little less, people would treat you better." The words were soft, but they struck like a thrown stone. Less what? Less weight, less laughter, less herself? She whispered, "I thought love was where you could be yourself." He slammed his glass down. "Enough. Don't use that tone with me. Henry's dead. You are Frank Miller's wife now." The fire in the stove dimmed, leaving half her face in warm light, half in shadow. The months that followed were tolerable, polite, and cold. He drank. She sewed. Two people living in the same house, but walking different worlds. She stopped baking. She only cooked soup, the kind Frank said was easy to swallow. When the wind blew, she no longer thought of Henry. She only thought of herself, fading quietly like dust in the corners of the saloon. 16 summers after Henry's death, nearly 6 years into her life with Frank, she woke and saw in the mirror a woman whose eyes had lost their shine. The night before, Frank had said, "I wish you were more like my first wife." That was the final crack. She rose early the next morning. While Frank slept, she folded her old wedding dress and wrote a short note. To Frank, "You didn't hurt me, but I can't spend the rest of my life living as a shadow. I'm leaving, not to find someone else, but to find my own laughter again." She left the key on the table, slipped Henry's silver ring into her pocket, and dragged her mother's old oak trunk toward the door. The wind rose. Dust curled around her feet. As she stepped onto the porch, Frank woke and rushed out, grabbing her wrist. "Where are you going? Come back." "I'm leaving," she said simply. "Are you crazy? People will laugh at me." He didn't say he needed her. He said he feared humiliation. Maybelle looked him straight in the eyes for the first time in years. "I'd rather be buried by the wind," she said quietly, "than disappear because of you." She pulled her arm free and walked away before the sun had fully risen. The wind kicked up, slamming the saloon shutters. Frank stood frozen. He saw the note fluttering on the table. After reading it, he sank into a chair and poured himself a full glass of whiskey, not the watered-down kind he drank every night. It was bitter, dark, heavy as ash. He drank it in one breath, staring down the road she took. The road out of Dust Hollow, where the wind carried the faint scent of butter he once ignored. Some folks leave not because they stop loving, but because half-love is a slow kind of death. When Maybelle walked away from Frank's saloon, she carried nothing but Henry's silver ring, a pride cracked to pieces, and the heavy oak trunk she'd kept for half her life. She didn't leave Dust Hollow. She didn't have the strength for that. Instead, she rented the cheapest room in town, a small space above an old horse stable owned by Mrs. Ruth. The room barely fit a bed and her trunk. That first night alone, she sat on the floor as the wind whistled through the cracks in the door, sounding too much like Frank's voice hissing in her ear. "If you were just a little less," she cried. She cried for Henry. She cried for the 6 silent years beside Frank. She cried for herself, a woman past 30, twice failed, empty-handed. She wondered if there was anything left worth holding on to. Then the moonlight slipped through the slats and settled on the oak trunk. She opened it, not to look for memories, but simply for a blanket. Inside, on top, lay her old wedding dress. It was wrinkled, carrying the smell of whiskey and kitchen smoke from Frank's saloon. She stared at it for a long moment, then reached for the old sewing kit she had thrown into that trunk 16 years ago, along with Henry's belongings. She didn't mend the dress. Instead, she lifted its hem where a piece of thick lining had been sewn in and carefully cut out a small square of fabric. The next morning, Mrs. Ruth complained about her son's torn shirt. Maybelle offered the little piece of cloth. "Let me fix it," she said. Her hands moved with the calm precision of someone who'd spent 16 years stitching through heartache. Every stitch was even and strong. Mrs. Ruth stared in disbelief. "Lord have mercy. That's beautiful." She pressed a few coins into Maybelle's hand. It was the first money she'd earned on her own in 6 years. In that moment, Maybelle realized something simple. All those years she'd spent mending her wedding dress, again and again, her hands had learned how to mend more than cloth. They were ready to mend her life. She took the last of her savings and hung a small wooden sign outside her door that read, "Maybelle Carter, seamstress." But the dash was worn and faded, so the sign simply looked soft and homemade. She began to sew. She repaired shirts for cowhands, dresses for the saloon girls, and scarves for tired wives. She didn't smile much, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Her hands kept busy, and when her hands worked, her mind didn't wander to dark places. She even started buying flour again and baking batches of her old butter biscuits. The familiar smell returned to her room like a lost friend. She didn't sell them. She gave them to the neighborhood kids who always came running when they smelled something warm. Slowly, stitch by stitch, she was standing up on her own again. 16 summers had passed since Henry died, and Dust Hollow had changed. The wind still moved through town, but Maybelle no longer heard Frank's voice inside it. She was past 30 now. No longer the clumsy girl with the quick laugh. She had become a woman who knew how to live slower, how to listen to the wind, and how to choose silence over explaining herself. Her little sewing shop had moved to a small house near the edge of town, not far from the blacksmith's forge. People came every day, some needing trousers patched, others bringing in torn shawls, and neighborhood children asking for scraps of cloth for their dolls. She took every request, always with a gentle smile. "Dust can be washed off," she often said, "so that a weary heart can be mended too, one stitch at a time." One morning, when her door hinge snapped from a hard gust of wind, Mrs. Ruth told her, "Take it to Mr. Brooks. He'll fix it right." Samuel Brooks had lived on the outskirts of Dust Hollow for as long as anyone could remember. Maybelle had passed his forge 1,000 times, but she had never spoken to him for more than a brief greeting. He was like part of the town itself, steady and familiar, like the church bell or the sound of the evening wind. He was older than she was by a good 10 years, sun-darkened skin, broad shoulders, scarred hands, and eyes that were surprisingly gentle. The eyes of a man who knew loneliness well, but had never let it turn him bitter. He took the broken hinge without much talk. "Leave it," he said simply. Whenever she returned for something he repaired, he handed it back with the same short reassurance. "It'll hold." Slowly, she began bringing him more things to fix. A nail, a hook, a window frame that didn't really need mending. She simply wanted to hear his quiet voice again. Soon, people in town began whispering, Maybelle's looking at someone new. She heard them this time, but she didn't mind. By that age, she had learned how to live with other people's voices. One afternoon, she brought him a basket of warm butter biscuits as a thank you. Samuel was stoking the forge, fire lighting up his face. He looked up, sweat sliding down his neck, the flames reflecting in his eyes. He accepted the biscuit and broke off a piece. "You're good at this," he said. "I remember this smell from your old shop. It's been years." She blinked. "You remember?" "I do," he said. "You and Henry used to walk by here." She froze. He had been there the whole time, watching from the background, saying nothing. She smiled softly. "And you know how to keep a fire alive. That's rare." He laughed, a warm sound ringing through the forge like metal striking metal. They married on a quiet evening with no guests, only the fire and the smell of iron. She wore her old wedding dress again. This time she loosened the seams, not because she had gained weight, but because she had learned how to breathe again. Samuel tied her hair back with a small piece of twine. No rings, no bouquet, no promises carved in stone. Just two people standing side by side, listening to the wind drift through the doorway while ash floated softly around their feet. The aging priest simply said, "You can go home now." That night, Samuel brewed coffee and set a cup before her. "It's bitter," he warned, "but if you drink it with someone else, it somehow feels softer." She tried it. It was bitter, yet the mix of coffee, ash, and the warm smell of metal made her chest loosen. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. In the days that followed, their life settled into a deep, steady quiet. He woke early and hammered at the forge, the ring of metal serving as her morning bell. She sewed by the window, hung fresh cloth to dry, and filled the house with the rich scent of butter biscuits again. At noon, they shared bread and coffee, sometimes without saying a word, but the silence between them felt gentle, not heavy like the silence she had known with Frank. Samuel rarely said anything romantic, but every morning he set her cup near the window, never once forgetting. When she wore down a needle, he forged her a new one from good steel. One afternoon she teased, "If I ever walked away, would you come looking?" He paused while wiping his hammer, looked at her with those steady eyes and said, "No, but the wind would know where to bring you back." She laughed, then fell quiet, realizing he had just told her he cared in the only way he knew how. On windy nights, she sat on the porch mending her old wedding dress. Samuel never asked why. He simply tended the fire, letting the glow fall across her face. Over time, the skin on her hands roughened, her features softened with age, yet something in her gaze remained warm. One autumn morning, as the wind carried red dust across the porch, she heard the church bell, the sound of his hammer, and her own laugh rising unexpectedly. Not loud, but full enough to remind her she was still alive. People said Maybelle Carter's third love was quiet and without drama, but it was solid, like the iron he shaped every day, and steady, like the wind that never stopped moving. Some folks love with words, others with their hands. But Samuel Brooks loved in silence, with the weight of his morning hammer strikes, and each time Maybelle heard that rhythm, she knew she wasn't forgotten. That autumn, Dust Hollow turned cold early. The wind carried the scent of burnt iron and slipped through every doorway. Samuel coughed lightly, set his hammer down and said, "Must be my age catching up. My bones know when the weather's turning." Maybelle just smiled, wrapped a scarf around his shoulders, and went upstairs to find an old blanket stored in the oak chest beneath the attic eaves. That chest had sat there for years, dark wood, rusted latch, holding the dust of old fabric and the faint smell of ash. It held every memory she hadn't dared to touch. When she lifted the lid, the hinges creaked, sending a thin cloud of dust drifting up like a sigh from the past. Beneath folded scraps of cloth, she found the blanket, and under it, she saw something she had forgotten existed, not a loose letter. It was her old wooden sewing box, the one she had thrown into the chest 17 years earlier. Next to it lay Henry's worn leather notebook. Her hand froze over the box, her heart beating like someone calling from far away. She opened it slowly. The spools of thread inside had mildewed with time. Under the bottom lining, she found a folded, yellowed piece of paper. Samuel stepped quietly into the attic and saw her sitting in the shaft of late afternoon light. "You all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, her voice trembling. "Just something I thought the wind had taken." Samuel didn't ask more. He knew exactly what that chest carried. He stepped back down the stairs, letting her face the past alone. She sat on the floor and unfolded the letter with shaking hands. The smell of old paper drifted out, the smell of a different time, of the El Paso road, of Henry's hands and the life they once shared. His handwriting was uneven, ink blotched where he had written in a hurry on the night before the trip that took him away. "My sweet Maybelle, if you are reading this, I may already be gone. Don't cry. The wind always knows how to bring me back to you. I know how you worry about the way you look. I know you blame yourself for little things. But darling, I loved every part of you, even the things you disliked about yourself. I loved the flower on your cheeks, the way you bent over to mend my shirts, the way you dropped spoons when you were nervous. You were the only one who ever looked at me like I was your whole world. And if someday you marry another man, don't ever feel guilty. I only want you to live, to laugh, and to let the wind touch you for me. Live fully, my sunshine. Henry." By the time she reached the last line, her tears had fallen onto the page, blurring the ink. She pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. Outside, the wind slipped through the attic window, carrying a soft sound that almost felt like the distant echo of wagon wheels returning from the desert road. For 17 years, she had lived in fear. Fear of forgetting. Fear that finding happiness with another man might betray her first love. Fear that Frank had been right. That she wasn't someone a man could love wholeheartedly. She didn't know how long she sat there. When she opened her eyes again, Samuel was beside her. He didn't ask questions. He simply reached out with a rough, coal-stained hand and wiped a tear from her cheek. "He loved you true," Samuel said in his quiet, steady voice. "I remember how he looked at you at the market." She nodded, her voice breaking. "I was scared, Samuel. Scared that being happy again meant I was betraying Henry." Samuel shook his head. "Some folks leave so you can keep living. His love wasn't a chain, Maybelle. It was the thing that set you free. I'm sure he knew that." She smiled, small but bright, like a spark rising from warm coals. For the first time in her life, she felt something loosen, light as an old paper letter, as dust rising from the porch, as the soft chime of wind bells outside. That evening, Dust Hollow glowed red with sunset. She folded the letter and placed it back in the chest, not locking it, only lowering the lid gently. Then she stepped onto the porch, where Samuel was tending the fire. The wind lifted her hair, and the gold of the setting sun warmed her cheeks. She whispered, "Henry wanted me to smile." Samuel smiled softly, said nothing, and handed her a cup of coffee. They sat side by side, watching the wind carry the red dust across the valley, and in that moment, she felt Henry there too, somewhere in the warmth of the fire, in the wind brushing her shoulder, in the peace finally settling inside her chest. Forgiveness doesn't happen in words, she thought. It happens the moment we stop fearing our own past. In her final years, Dust Hollow had changed. The dirt road was finally paved, the church stood bright with fresh white paint. Though the dust in town never once stayed still, Dust Hollow still had its wind, the kind that didn't carry seasons, but carried the memories of everyone who had ever lived long enough to leave a mark. On the southern rise, Maybelle Carter's little house still stood. The door paint had faded to silver, and an old wind chime hung on the porch. Whenever the breeze drifted through, It let out a soft, gentle ring, almost like the quiet heartbeat of someone who had learned how to smile slowly again. Samuel Brooks had passed 3 winters before her. He died peacefully in his sleep, his hand still holding hers. The blacksmith's forge had gone cold long ago, but the smell of iron and smoke still clung to the wood. Every morning, she made 2 cups of coffee and set one across the table where he used to sit. She didn't talk to the empty chair. She only looked at it, then smiled, the kind of smile a person gives when they finally understand what enough means. The days moved softly. She still sat and sewed whenever the wind picked up, only now she wasn't mending her old wedding dress anymore. Over the years, she had taken pieces of cloth from Henry's shirts, scraps from Frank's aprons, threads from Samuel's work clothes, and bits from her own sewing shop. She stitched them all together. It was no longer a dress. It had become a quilt, thin and worn, but alive with color. Each patch held a piece of her life. Maybelle's quilt. In the late afternoon light that spilled through her window, she sat on the porch, her needle catching the sun as it dipped low. Her eyes were fading, but her heart felt clearer than it ever had. Old Mrs. Ruth passed by with her cane, glanced at her, and called out, "Sewing again, Maybelle? Don't tell me somebody's getting married." Maybelle laughed softly and answered, "No, Ruth. I'm finished now. It's a quilt. It's warm." Ruth went quiet. She didn't laugh, she didn't tease. She just stared a moment, then murmured, "You really are a woman of the wind. It blows you away, but you always find your way back." That evening, the sky turned red as wine. The wind kicked up, tossing sand across the porch. Maybelle laid the quilt across her lap. It no longer felt like a reminder of loss. It felt whole. The quilt fluttered softly, carrying the warmth of iron, the scent of butter, and a faint memory of the El Paso Trail. She could almost hear Henry's wagon wheels, Frank's glass breaking, Samuel's steady hammer striking iron. Their names drifted together in the wind without jealousy or pain. She knew each one had left behind a different kind of love, and because of them, her heart still beat and still knew how to care. As the sun slipped behind the hills, she set her needle aside, folded the quilt neatly into the old oak chest, and walked out onto the porch. She sat in her weathered chair, holding a cup of coffee gone cold. The wind chime whispered above her, blending into the last breath of Dust Hollow's long day. She closed her eyes, smiled a small, peaceful smile, and said softly to herself, "If I ever get another life, I hope I get to love again, even just once." Night fell. Moonlight spilled over the oak chest, where the quilt of 3 lives rested. Folks in town later said that sometimes, on certain nights, the wind in Dust Hollow turned strangely warm. They swore it smelled a little like fresh-baked bread, like someone smiling out there in the desert. People say the wind takes everything, your youth, your loves, your time. But sometimes, the wind brings them back, in the way you learn to smile when you stand alone. In Dust Hollow, the wind still blows the way it always has. But for anyone who has ever loved, it is more than wind. It is the quiet voice of hearts that never truly left. And if this story made you pause for a moment and listen, then feel free to subscribe and stay with me as we explore more journeys of those who once loved just as deeply.